Chapter 8. The Test. The morning servants arrived with their usual silent efficiency, but today their movements crackled with nervous energy. The youngest, barely 16 with dark hair that caught light like spun obsidian, kept glancing toward the doorway as if expecting something terrible to emerge from the shadows.
Her hands trembled as she prepared the bathing water, crystalline vessels slipping from fingers that should have been steady with practice. When I asked about the tension radiating from all three women, she leaned close enough that her whispered words barely disturbed the air between us.
"Don't venture to the lower terraces alone today,"
she breathed, her eyes wide with fear.
"The plants there, they hunger for more than soil and water when the dimensional barriers grow thin."
The warning sent ice through my veins despite water heated to perfect temperature. As they dressed me in silk that moved with its own ethereal wind, the youngest continued her urgent whispers about dimensional flora that could strip consciousness from the unwary, crystalline growths that sang visitors into madness, with harmonies too beautiful for mortal minds.
"The barriers weaken during certain celestial alignments,"
she explained while braiding my hair with threads that pulsed like captured starlight.
"What feeds on thought and memory in other realms can sometimes taste our reality. Today is dangerous for lone wandering."
I wanted to ask more, but the spokeswoman's sharp glance silenced further conversation. Whatever knowledge the servants possessed about the sanctuary's hidden perils wasn't meant for casual sharing with livestock being maintained in useful condition. When they departed, I stood before mirrors that showed more than mere reflection. The woman looking back had been subtly transformed through divine intervention. Features refined beyond human limitation, skin that caught light like polished marble, hair that moved with supernatural wind. Still recognizably Vera Ashworth, but enhanced according to cosmic standards. The mountain's breathing surrounded me as I ventured beyond my luxurious prison, its rhythm speaking of consciousness larger than mere geology. Corridors carved from living stone pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to observe directly, their surfaces reflecting depths that spoke of spaces larger than physical dimensions should allow. I chose to explore the upper gardens first, drawn by glimpses of botanical impossibilities that challenged everything Mother's training had taught me about natural law.
The terraced levels revealed architecture that flowed like frozen water, organic curves that spoke of growth rather than construction. Balconies and walkways existed in perfect harmony with vegetation that should have required entirely different atmospheric conditions.
The air itself hummed with contained power that made each breath an effort. Scents drifted from sources I couldn't identify. Desert spices mixed with Arctic pine, tropical blooms mingled with something mineral that spoke of distant worlds when inhaled too deeply.
Every surface caught light from sources that operated according to principles unknown to earthly physics.
Through crystalline barriers that served as walls, I glimpsed specimens that belonged in extinction catalogs rather than active cultivation. Trees whose bark pulsed with internal light, their roots intertwining in patterns too complex for natural selection to produce. Flowers that tracked my movement with predatory awareness, their petals opening and closing in rhythm with my heartbeat. But it was the grass that unnerved me most. Each blade whispered when touched by wind that carried voices in languages older than human speech. Not random sound, structured communication that bypassed conscious understanding and spoke directly to nerve endings designed for simpler interaction. The fourth terrace called to me with glimpses of golden fruit gleaming through alien foliage. Despite the young servant's warnings about dangerous alignments, curiosity overrode caution as I descended stone steps that adjusted their height automatically to accommodate my stride.
The confrontation came without warning as the pathway curved between bulbous specimens that resembled grotesque flowers the size of wine barrels. Grimjaw materialized from shadow with movements that spoke of predator materializing where prey least expected death.
Her 8-foot frame unfolded from darkness like nightmare-given flesh. Scars mapped centuries of violence across powerful muscles that could rend steel with casual effort. When amber eyes fixed on me with calculating intelligence, the very air seemed to recoil from her presence.
Lost, little mouse.
Her voice carried undertones of avalanche barely contained by pack discipline.
Or simply too stupid to recognize danger when it wears such obvious warning colors.
She gestured toward the bulbous plants that lined the pathway, their crimson surfaces pulsing with rhythm that matched something vast and patient waiting beneath terraced gardens. Each specimen bore warning markings that hurt to perceive directly, colors that existed in spectrums human eyes weren't designed to process safely.
These beauties feed on dimensional energy.
She continued with false helpfulness, amber gaze tracking my every micro-expression for signs of growing terror.
Quite docile if you don't disturb their feeding cycles. The juveniles are particularly sensitive to vibration.
As if summoned by her words, movement rippled through the crimson specimens. Not wind-driven motion, but conscious response to presence that registered as potential prey. The flower's surfaces began to glisten with secretions that carried scents of overripe fruit mixed with something chemical that burned nasal passages.
The parent sleeps beneath,
Grimjaw added, stepping carefully between the juvenile specimens with grace that spoke of intimate familiarity with their feeding patterns.
much larger, much hungrier, much less discriminating about what constitutes appropriate nourishment.
She demonstrated the safe path through careful placement of massive feet, each step avoiding ground that showed signs of subsurface root systems. Her movements held predatory elegance that transcended mere caution. This was apex predator navigating territory claimed by something even more dangerous.
But she was demonstrating the route with timing calculated for maximum peril. Each gesture took just long enough for the juveniles to register my presence as potential threat to their feeding grounds. Her delayed howl of warning echoed across terraces just slowly enough to ensure maximum danger before assistance could arrive.
The first specimen struck without further preamble, bulbous form erupting an explosion of grasping tentacles that sought to ensnare unwary prey with sticky secretions. Its maw opened like flower blooming in reverse, revealing rows of thorn-like teeth designed for processing organic matter into digestible components.
I stumbled backward, hands grabbing the first weapon available, a broken branch from dimensional oak that had been pruned for optimal growth patterns. The wood felt alien in my grip, its grain running in directions that violated earthly physics. But desperation made any tool welcome against predator that moved with hungry intelligence. The creature's tentacles wrapped around the improvised weapon with crushing force, acid secretions beginning immediate dissolution of plant matter that should have been resistant to chemical breakdown. I fought against appendages that possessed strength beyond natural selection's usual parameters, their surfaces burning where they contacted exposed skin. Behind me, something much larger began to stir.
The ground trembled with vibrations that spoke of massive form awakening to disturbance in its carefully maintained feeding territory. Soil cracked as root systems thick as tree trunks shifted position, preparing to bring parent organism into direct engagement with threats to its offspring. That's when Grimjaw's howl finally reached sufficient volume to carry across dimensional barriers, warning that came just late enough to ensure maximum entertainment value from mortal struggling against forces beyond her comprehension. The parent plant erupted from Earth like nightmare birthed from botanical fever dreams. Its maw could have swallowed horses whole, tentacles thick as ancient tree trunks reaching for prey with inexorable hunger. The ground shook beneath its emergence, terraced gardens trembling as something the size of buildings oriented toward fresh nourishment. Digestive enzymes dripped from rows of teeth arranged in patterns too complex for natural evolution, each drop leaving smoking craters where it contacted stone pathways. This wasn't simple carnivorous plant. This was apex predator that had been cultivated through divine intervention to transcend normal biological limitations.
The massive tentacles wrapped around my waist with crushing force that drove breath from lungs already strained by terror and exertion. As the creature lifted me toward digestive processes that would reduce consciousness to mere chemical components, time seemed to slow with clarity that accompanied approaching death.
Then Kaelan materialized in blur of controlled fury that redefined violence itself. His blade moved through tentacles with surgical precision that spoke of centuries perfecting the application of force to cosmic problems. The parent plant's scream echoed across dimensional barriers as divine steel severed appendages that had withstood every earthly attempt at damage.
He hauled me away from digestive processes already beginning their work on captured prey, massive hands checking for injuries with efficiency that spoke of experience treating wounds inflicted by dangers beyond mortal comprehension. When amber eyes met mine, something shifted in their depths. Concern that transcended mere property evaluation.
Did she warn you about the parent beneath the soil?
He demanded, voice carrying dangerous undertones that made surviving plant matter recoil from sonic frequencies.
When I shook my head, still gasping from acid burns and terror that reached deeper than physical trauma, something cold and predatory flickered across scarred features. His gaze shifted toward where Grimjaw had vanished with timing too perfect to be accidental. For the first time since my arrival, I glimpsed fractures in the pack's seemingly perfect hierarchy. Whatever loyalty bound the Lycanthropes to their alpha, it didn't prevent individual members from testing boundaries through methods that placed valuable resources at calculated risk. The wounded plant retreated into earth that welcomed its damaged form, leaving behind only torn soil and the lingering scent of digestive enzymes powerful enough to process dimensional matter. Around us, the terraced gardens returned to their previous state of alien tranquility, as if predatory flora attempting to consume visiting livestock was merely another aspect of daily routine.
The barriers are thin today.
Kaelan observed, his voice carrying undertones that spoke of implications beyond simple astronomical observations.
Creatures that feed on consciousness find easier passage between realms. Grimjaw should have mentioned this before allowing you to wander unsupervised.
The words carried weight that spoke of pack discipline administered according to standards more stringent than earthly military justice. Whatever entertainment Grimjaw had sought through exposing me to dimensional predators, she had overstepped boundaries that even alpha female privileges couldn't excuse. As he escorted me toward upper terraces where juvenile specimens posed less immediate threat to valuable genetic material, I realized the sanctuary's hidden hierarchies were more complex than simple pack dynamics. Power structures that included divine authority, cosmic mandates, and individual initiatives that sometimes conflicted with overall objectives. I was learning to navigate forces that transcended mortal understanding, finding my place within systems that treated consciousness itself as renewable resource. The children lived because of golden fruit that had drawn cosmic attention to desperate theft. Now, survival required understanding rules that governed existence between dimensions, where beauty and terror grew in the same soil and safety was privilege that required constant vigilance to maintain. The mountain breathed around us with rhythm that spoke of intelligence, monitoring every interaction, every test of boundaries, every lesson learned through exposure to powers that reshaped reality according to cosmic specifications. My education in divine politics had begun through nearly becoming nourishment for cultivated nightmares. What other lessons awaited in gardens where impossible things grew according to purposes beyond mortal comprehension? The terraced levels stretched above us like promises written in living stone, each containing revelations about power that spanned worlds and knowledge that transcended the limitations of single-planet existence. I was no longer merely prisoner in paradise. I was student being taught curriculum that would determine whether consciousness survived transformation, or if some forms of education could only be received through complete dissolution of everything that had defined individual identity. The acid burns on my skin served as reminder that beauty in divine realms carried teeth sharper than earthly predators could imagine.
Chapter 9. Magical Discoveries.
The morning air carried scents of impossible gardens. As I wandered the terraced paths, my skin still tender from yesterday's acid burns where dimensional predators had marked me as prey. Stone walkways wound between specimens that defied natural law, their alien beauty both mesmerizing and menacing in the ethereal light. The servants had been more nervous than usual during my bath, whispering about their master's dark mood after yesterday's incident. Something about pack discipline and boundaries overstepped. When pressed, the youngest had only shaken her head and murmured warnings about staying visible to the watchers who observed from spaces between dimensions. I found myself drawn toward the upper cultivation terraces, where golden light filtered through leaves that chimed softly in mountain winds. The air here felt different, charged with energy that made my senses tingle. Each breath carried flavors that belonged to no earthly atmosphere, scents that triggered memories of places I'd never visited. Through gaps in the alien foliage, I glimpsed movement. Someone was working among the specimens, their presence betrayed by the subtle shift in harmonics that accompanied divine interaction with botanical impossibilities. The circular grove opened before me like cathedral carved from living starlight. Reality seemed more fluid here, dimensional barriers thin enough that other worlds bled through in prismatic fragments. Trees from a dozen realms grew in impossible harmony, their roots intertwining in patterns of careful planning across geological timescales. At the grove's heart, Kaelan knelt beside prepared soil that glowed with inner radiance. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy as he worked, scarred fingers guiding branches with precision of centuries, perfecting techniques unknown to mortal horticulture. The sight stopped me cold, this destroyer of armies, this breaker of worlds, tending plants with the gentle focus of a master craftsman.
3 specimen branches lay arranged on crystalline work surface beside him. One bore silver bark that pulsed with captured starlight, its surface reflecting depths of infinite space contained within finite matter. Another displayed leaves that shifted color with each breath of otherworldly wind, their hues cycling through spectrums that had no earthly names. The third sprouted thorns that seemed to bend light around themselves, creating distortions that hurt to observe directly.
I watched, transfixed, as he selected grafting points with knowledge beyond normal botanical training. His amber eyes studied cellular structures invisible to mortal sight, divine senses reading genetic compatibility in ways my mother's teaching had never imagined possible. When he pressed the silver branch against prepared rootstock, power flowed from his touch like liquid fire made visible. The union sparked with energies of cosmic forces rather than simple agricultural technique. I held my breath as hybrid vigor manifested in real time, watching impossible evolution compressed into moments that should have required millennia.
The grafted specimen responded with growth that defied every principle of plant development. Bronze petals unfurled from buds that hadn't existed heartbeats before, each bloom carrying the essence of worlds whose names existed only in divine memory. The flowers chimed when mountain wind brushed their surfaces, creating harmonies that resonated in bone and blood.
I know you're there.
He said without turning, his voice carrying the weight of mountains barely restrained by courtesy.
Enjoying the show?
Heat flooded my cheeks as I emerged from hiding behind a cluster of singing ferns that had offered inadequate concealment from divine senses.
The crystalline chimes of their communication network seemed to mock my amateur attempt at stealth, their musical laughter echoing across the grove.
At least someone's productive around here instead of keeping innocent people prisoner, I said, lifting my chin with defiance that felt hollow against his overwhelming presence. His scarred features darkened like storm clouds gathering on distant horizons. When amber eyes fixed on me with predatory assessment, the very air seemed to thicken with barely contained violence that made my survival instinct scream warnings about apex predators recognizing challenges to their authority.
Innocent?
The word fell between us like accusation carved from glacial ice.
You stole from me. 4 centuries of work, and you took my most promising specimens without understanding their significance.
The casual mention of time frames that dwarfed human civilization sent ice through veins despite the grove's unnatural warmth. 400 years of patient cultivation, genetic lines carefully maintained across spans that encompassed the rise and fall of empires. And I had harvested from that research like common orchard thief. Children were dying while you hoarded cures like a dragon with gold. I shot back, anger overriding the caution that proximity to divine power should have demanded. Those apples saved lives that your cosmic politics would have sacrificed for whatever grand design requires botanical impossibilities. His massive frame rose to full imposing height, 7 feet of controlled violence that towered over my form with presence that made reality bend around divine authority. The air between us crackled with energy held in check by will alone.
You think this is about hoarding?
His voice carried harmonics that made the grove's crystalline formations ring in sympathetic response.
The Seraph mandate your presence here, little thief. I'm bound by cosmic law to keep you safe whether I want to or not.
The casual dismissal in his tone struck deeper than intended insults. Divine commands that reduced my existence to cosmic inconvenience, my life measured only by whatever value higher powers assigned to my continued breathing. The golden fruit that had saved dying children meant nothing compared to bureaucratic requirements imposed by beings whose attention could reshape reality. If I can defy a god to save dying children, surely you can defy a seraph to end this charade. I shot back, my voice carrying the same edge that had driven me to steal from his precious grove. Or are you not as powerful as everyone claims? My feet carried me toward the sanctuary's lower levels before conscious thought could override emotional reaction. Stone pathways adjusted their configuration automatically to accommodate my stride, the mountain's living architecture responding to divine presence that walked its corridors with increasing familiarity. The pack's common area opened before me like den carved from predatory dreams. Lycanthropes lounged on surfaces that had been shaped from living stone, their amber eyes tracking my approach with interest of entertainment value rather than genuine concern. The scent of wild places and barely contained violence filled air that tasted of hunts conducted across impossible terrain. Grimjaw intercepted my retreat with timing of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this confrontation. Her massive frame blocked the corridor with casual menace of apex predator claiming territory from lesser beings. Other pack members shifted position behind her, creating formation that eliminated escape routes while maintaining appearance of casual gathering.
Running from your betters again, little mouse?
Her voice carried undertones of avalanche barely contained by pack discipline.
Perhaps yesterday's lesson wasn't clear enough about the consequences of wandering beyond your assigned boundaries.
The casual cruelty in her words, the way she referenced my near-death experience as educational opportunity, shattered something inside my chest that had been building pressure since the morning's confrontation with Kaelan. Rage flooded through neural pathways like liquid fire seeking release through whatever target presented itself. Your lesson nearly got me killed, and we both know it was deliberate, I said, stepping closer instead of retreating despite every survival instinct screaming warnings about challenging pack hierarchy. At least I'm not a jealous dog following my master's heels while pretending loyalty masks personal inadequacy. The insult hung in air that suddenly felt thick enough to cut with blades. Every lycanthrope in the common area froze as words that violated pack hierarchy echoed off stone walls carved from living mountain. Grimjaw's amber eyes blazed with fury that promised violence beyond anything yesterday's predatory plants could have delivered. Her massive hand shot out with speed that blurred between positions, seizing my throat with strength that could snap mortal necks like kindling. The grip tightened just enough to restrict breathing, while demonstrating exactly how fragile biology remained compared to creatures born from divine intervention and natural selection.
You dare speak to your betters with such disrespect?
Grimjaw's voice carried harmonics that made stone walls vibrate in sympathetic response to barely contained rage.
You are nothing, little thief. A temporary inconvenience that our alpha tolerates, only because cosmic law demands it.
The pack gathered behind her with movements of predators recognizing opportunity for entertainment at the expense of prey that had overstepped boundaries. Their amber eyes held anticipation mixed with approval for leadership that maintained proper hierarchy through application of controlled violence. But something in my reflexes must have given her pause. Perhaps the same stubborn defiance that had driven me to steal from gods in the first place. The grip around my throat loosened just enough to allow speech, though her claws remained positioned to resume choking with minimal effort.
Remember your place.
She snarled, shoving me backward with force that sent me stumbling against stone walls that absorbed kinetic energy without visible damage.
When the Seraph grow bored with their current game, you will disappear like morning mist. But we are eternal. His family, his strength, his true companions across lifetimes that span the rise and fall of civilizations.
Her laughter echoed off corridors that existed in spaces larger than physical dimensions should allow as she stalked away, with pack members flowing behind her like shadows given predatory purpose. The sound carried promises of future encounters that would involve less restraint and more educational value through direct application of pain.
I stood alone in the common area, my throat aching from pressure that had left bruises on skin. The weight of my situation crashed down with force that left me gasping. Trapped between cosmic authorities that viewed me as useful resource and pack dynamics that considered my presence contamination of carefully maintained hierarchy. My feet carried me toward quarters that represented the only sanctuary within this mountain of impossible wonders and calculated cruelties. The corridors stretched longer during retreat than they had during approach, as if the architecture itself wanted to extend my journey through spaces where divine will had carved beauty from living stone. The door sealed behind me with finality of isolation, more complete than mere physical barriers. I collapsed onto silk-covered surfaces that adjusted automatically to provide comfort, while I processed the day's revelations about power structures that operated according to rules I barely understood. The luxury surrounding me felt like mockery now. Golden fixtures and crystalline interfaces that responded only to divine authority. Silk hangings that shimmered with patterns too complex for mortal eyes to follow safely. I was livestock being maintained in conditions appropriate for genetic material that served cosmic purposes beyond my ability to influence. But the botanical knowledge I'd inherited from my mother's legacy remained intact despite divine enhancement and pack intimidation. Somewhere in this mountain sanctuary, research continued that could reshape existence according to purposes I couldn't fathom. And perhaps understanding those purposes might reveal opportunities for agency within systems designed to eliminate mortal autonomy entirely. The mountain breathed around me with rhythm of consciousness larger than mere geology, promising revelations about power that spanned worlds and knowledge of single-planet limitations. Tomorrow would bring new encounters with forces beyond comprehension, new tests of boundaries that governed interaction between divine authority and mortal presumption. For now, I could only rest in luxury that felt increasingly like gilded cage designed for creatures whose value lay in genetics rather than consciousness. The children lived because of choices I'd made in desperate love. Whether that love could survive transformation into whatever cosmic designs required remained question that only time would answer. The acid burns from yesterday's encounter throbbed with each heartbeat, reminding me that beauty in divine realms carried dangers beyond earthly predation. Tomorrow would reveal what other lessons waited in gardens where impossible things grew, according to purposes beyond mortal comprehension.